What is on your radar today, Ryan?
Well, I have a little scoop for us today. So yesterday, the Congressional Progressive Caucus met privately to hash out strategy on its antitrust legislation on a members-only call. According to multiple Democrats who were on the call and asked to speak anonymously, it was one of the most contentious CPC meetings in years. To give a little background, late last month, the Judiciary Subcommittee that handles antitrust policy passed 6 bills in a marathon 29-hour session. They're aimed at reining in and breaking up big tech. And the most outspoken Democratic opponent was Zoe Lofgren, who represents Silicon Valley. The meeting got off to a rough start when Lofgren noted that she had raised an extraordinary amount of money from Silicon Valley companies over the years, but because she runs in a safe blue district, she hadn't spent any of it on her own campaign since 1996 and instead distributed it widely to other campaigns. Now, raising corporate money and spreading it around the caucus is a common tactic deployed by members looking to grow their power. But it is highly unusual to talk openly about the practice on a legislative call like that. It's a pretty shocking thing to say, one Democrat who was on the call told me. The debate from there devolved into unusually personal terms. Lofgren argued that the legislation wasn't just wrong-headed, but poorly written. Those are fighting words on Capitol Hill. She said that she hadn't had enough time to review the legislation sufficiently and knocked the unnecessary dead-of-night committee votes, arguing that the approaches the bills take won't accomplish what could be worthy goals, while also doing collateral damage to the economy. That was her take. Representative Pramila Jayapal, who's the chair of the CPC, eventually cut Lofgren off and noted that despite representing Seattle, the home of Amazon, she's been willing to take on big tech. David Cicilline of Rhode Island, the lead author of much of the legislation and chair of the Antitrust Subcommittee, was blunt in his response to Lofgren, and he told her, "You may disagree with the bills, you may have other interests you're trying to protect, but to suggest members of the subcommittee of the Judiciary Committee don't understand them, with all due respect, is deeply offensive." He also accused her of merely parroting, quote, industry talking points. The arguments made by Lofgren against the legislation are the same as those made by big tech. That's not in dispute. But to question the motivation of those arguments or the link between those positions and campaign funds is considered wildly out of bounds on Capitol Hill. That's something that you just don't say out loud. Representative Jerry Nadler of New York, the committee chair, also spoke up against Lofgren, though sources differ on how aggressive his rhetoric was, with some saying he joined in the ad hominem attacks and others saying he merely stood up for the committee process and for the legislation while enjoying seeing his longtime rival shredded by other committee members. Nadler and Lofgren have history. In 2017, when committee chair Representative John Conyers of Michigan stepped down from Congress, Nadler was in line to succeed him. But Lofgren challenged him in what The Intercept at the time described as the first battle of the anti-monopoly era. The article quoted antitrust attorney Jonathan Cantor saying, quote, "It certainly may raise questions to have someone from Silicon Valley in a position where one of the key responsibilities is to oversee the conduct of Silicon Valley." Partly, if not primarily, as a result of those dynamics, Nadler beat her for the gavel, and the committee has been in aggressive pursuit of bipartisan antitrust legislation ever since. The committee embarked on a 2-year investigation of big tech, primarily overseen by Judiciary staffer Lina Khan. Lofgren objected to the result of that investigation, which was a report that recommended legislation to tackle big tech's runaway power, but the committee adopted it as an official report nonetheless. That staffer, Lina Khan, is now chair of the FTC, and that antitrust attorney, Jonathan Cantor, is rumored to be the leading choice to run the antitrust division at the Department of Justice. No wonder Silicon Valley is upset.
So we talked about this with Matt Stoller recently.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, and what's amazing is that what I had heard is that Lofgren was so offended by being called, essentially a shill for Silicon Valley, that she was talking to other members of the California delegation about potentially sending a letter to Pelosi complaining about it. Now, from what I've heard, that she's probably decided not to end up doing that because that's an awkward letter to write. Mm-hmm. Like, how do you put in words that somebody else accused you of this? Then you have to defend that. It's better maybe to just move on. But it is awfully unusual to have in private a member of Congress tell another, that they're protecting the interests of an industry with their talking points.
I mean, she should go to Pelosi, because who has more people in Silicon Valley chirping in their ear than Nancy Pelosi?
Although, Lofgren and Anna Eshoo are Pelosi's two best friends in the House caucus, but Pelosi has heavily prioritized getting this antitrust legislation through, and I was told that she was involved with kind of pressuring Democrats to make sure it got through the committee. So I'm not sure what kind of reception she would get if she did complain. So
this is what I was going to ask you about, because I have questions for you on this. I'm so curious about how these internal dynamics have ended up in, for instance, how does it happen that Joe Biden nominates Lina Khan, right? What's going on inside the Democratic Party that voices like this are now actually being elevated to the top of the discourse? So from your reporting, as you're talking to people, is the tide really shifting?
I mean, certainly to see Lina Khan not just be on the FTC, but Biden to name her as chair, right after she got confirmed, was quite something. Rohit Chopra has been on the FTC and has been kind of the antitrust voice there, and the party has seen that they were making political progress with what Commissioner Chopra was getting done. And so you have this kind of burgeoning anti-monopoly movement that is transpartisan, really catching on within Democratic circles, and it is quite a move, to go from having Lina Khan, it was a Columbia University professor who kind of has reinvented how to tackle antitrust, along with Chopra now going to CFPB. So there's going to be another choice headed to the FTC, and then potentially Jonathan Cantor running the antitrust division. You went from a place where Zoe Lofgren was kind of the leading voice on Silicon Valley in the early 2000s. She was great because at the time, Democrats in Silicon Valley were aligned. She was great on net neutrality. She was great on SOPA, which was related to net neutrality. She was great on NSA stuff. Whenever there's a challenge to Silicon Valley, either from the NSA or from the telecoms, she was in the right place. But as Silicon Valley has morphed into now its own threat, that politics is no longer welcome.
So my final question for you is, do you think this is a result? Because a lot of the establishment Democrats' complaints and their fury at big tech stems from what they see as, let's say, Russian disinformation. Facebook allowing Russian disinformation to allegedly tip the scales in the 2016 election, or Facebook allowing hate speech or conspiracy theories. Do you think that this is a marriage between people with legitimate antitrust concerns and people with censorship concerns? You say the same thing happens on the right. Or people with speech concerns, I should say. Is that where this is coming from, that you have people like Nancy Pelosi who are furious about the way, there's deep fakes of her spreading over on Facebook, and then you have the antitrust people? It's
definitely a part of it. And in that 2017 story on the fight between Nadler and Lofgren, we did talk about that, because this was right in the wake of the 2016 election. And so just the same way that antitrust advocates are exploiting Republican concerns about censorship, antitrust advocates on the left exploited resistance concerns about Facebook, particularly Facebook, kind of spreading all of this Russian misinformation and the Macedonian websites that were doing all this fake news. Fake news used to be a real term, to describe genuinely fake news. You would have a site that was called abcnewsnews.com.
Yes.
And it would look like ABC News, but it wasn't. It was from somewhere in Latvia or something.
Yes.
And then somebody would pay to have that spread around Facebook. And it was genuinely fake, just completely made up. And Democrats blamed that in part for Trump being elected. And so then when antitrust people came in and said, well, how about we crack down on these people? They're like, yeah, let's do it.
The annoying thing is that abc.news.go/whatever, those things still exist, and we don't, the term fake news has been so diluted.
What do we call them now?
Yeah, exactly. But they are literal fake news. Well, next on Rising, Team Rising is joining us to discuss Megyn Kelly's latest allegedly controversial take when Rising returns.